So yes, name's Paul Morley. I work for Nedbank. I look after data operations at an enterprise level through Enterprise Group, Nedbank Group. That's infrastructure, job roles, analytics, AI, deep learning, regulatory reporting, BI, infrastructure, processing. Everything to do with data at Nedbank sits in my little domain, and it is little compared to a lot of other businesses. And a topic that's very, very close to my heart is how is Africa positioned in this new age that we find ourselves of disruption, big data, AI, deep learning, all of those things that seem to be the trend, the hype. And I believe through all of that sort of noise, I think Africa has a chance, a second chance. Now, I'm going to start off, and it's important for me to have a good base. So this new fourth industrial age everybody talks about, I'm going to briefly give you some context around the fourth industrial age, a little bit of history. I'm going to give you what big data is and what big data is not, because I think that's also very, very important to understand when you hear this term big data, and a lot of people, and I've seen it every day, people have different views, different perspectives of what big data is. So hopefully I can dispel a few myths around big data and tell you what big data is, and then go in and tell you where I think Africa has an advantage in this fourth industrial age, and why. And then I'll be showing you some big data examples of how South Africa uses big data. So without belaboring the point, I'm going to give you some context. I'm going to give you a backdrop, and then I'm going to talk about the real world and why it's important for us to consider and understand big data. What does it mean to society in Africa? And how can Africa leverage the opportunity it's now faced with given the fourth industrial age? Very important pieces, right. And I'm going to briefly speak about the industrial ages and why it's important, is just to make sure that we're on a good base of understanding. The first industrial age was the advent of steam power and water power in about the 1600s. 1700s, that's where it started, okay. And at that point, you've often, maybe you've heard the term, the Newtonian age, Isaac Newton. More around about the time of Isaac Newton, that is when society, civilization, technology started to change, slowly at first, and then escalated further from that. We then go into the second industrial age, which is around 1871, and that talks to the telegraph, and communication and better ways of communication. Railroads played a big part in the development of modern society, especially the big example is the United States. So that age was critical for the maturing and evolution of the USA today, okay? And that was termed the second industrial age. The third industrial age was the so-called digital revolution. And that started early 1900s. Might not seem like that, but that's more or less where it started. In the 1920s, the advent of the starting to get into the digital domain through World War II, the advent of manufacturing, mass production, automation, etc. And that kicked off another sort of change in our industries. Now we're coming into the fourth age. I believe we've been in the fourth age for a number of years, so it's nothing new, but specifically the fourth age leverages on three core pillars: nanotechnology, medical technology, and AI and data. Those are the three core pillars of the fourth industrial age, as determined and defined by the World Economic Forum a number of years ago. And obviously data, AI fits into that, is going to play a significant part in that space. And this is where I'm saying Africa potentially, and for that matter, a lot of the third world, okay, has a chance to now start leapfrogging the first world countries for a number of reasons. The reason why the first world countries like the USA, England, France, and England coming out of coming into the third industrial age and the second industrial age, England superseded most of the other countries in Europe at the time, and it was key foundation to establishing what is termed the British Empire. Okay, so a big part of the British Empire and the success of the British Empire was due to the start of the third industrial age and the second industrial age, more or less then. So when we go into industrial ages and we talk about industrial ages, fundamentally they change civilization. We've seen the example in the USA. I've given an example of Britain and how it achieved its goals. And again, Britain, steam, manufacturing, mass production, and the technologies that derive from that enabled them to leapfrog pretty much any other competing nation at the time. So we must not take these ages lightly, because they do create sustainable civilizations and have a significant impact on society as a whole. And I believe the third world and Africa can play a big part, and I'll tell you why in a second. Some of the other challenges we face in this new age: political, economic, and social. And each of these dimensions are going to be challenged and have been challenged by what the fourth industrial age brings. These are new things, haven't been talked about before, haven't been discussed before, and all have a significant impact on society and civilization. And it's important to understand those risks that this age brings us into. Because as much as we can grow in this age, we can also destroy in this age. And the horrible thing is, the big risk here is, in this new age, and we've seen it over recent history, can destroy societies and civilizations overnight. There's a few examples of that. The first one I'm going to quote would be the Arab Spring, if you remember the Arab Spring a number of years ago. That was an example, and probably the first example, of how influential the data and digital world can be on society. It brought down a country and took the Middle East to a brink of a war. This is how fundamental this space we play in, and what data and digital can do and have an impact on society. Very, very, very important. One needs to understand these risks. And Africa specifically, there's something that's been coined now. It's called the new digital colonialism, data colonialism. What does that mean? That means, and this is the challenge Africa faces and South Africa face, that means if we are not on the forefront of data and technology and digital, you are going to be manipulated by the entities, countries, and parts of the world that are good at it. Give you an example. Cambridge Analytica, back in the days of Zuma, they tested an AI model on South Africa in its political system just to test its model. And that was when Trump was going to become president. So to test their model, they used South Africa as a sandpit. And probably one of the only truthful things Zuma said was in one conference was that there is this digital data misinformation and manipulation. He was right. Not that we believed him at the time, but he was right. So that is the power. And by the way, South Africa was the first. That went on to Kenya, and they tested the second time in their elections, and then finally they tested it in Mexico before the Trump elections, where they used that model to help shape and position Donald Trump as a presidential candidate and ultimately win. That's the power of data. And if you're not wise and you're not paying attention, countries can manipulate and impact your own society. So it's vital that we become skilled and understand the risks and context behind data, digital, and big data. Because if you're naive, and these other examples, the Chinese built that African unity building in the Congo. Well, guess what? 10 years later, after the Chinese funded that, some techie in the server room found out that the entire building was rigged. And there was surveillance built into all aspects, and everything that went through the servers of that African Union building that the Chinese so kindly sponsored, every bit of information was fed back to China. Took them 5 years to find that. Data and digital is powerful, and people are using it for good and bad. And it can change and shape society and history as we know it. And it's important for us to understand what big data is. So, what I'm going to tell you, big data is not data. So it might be called big data, but it's not data. Big data is the process of managing data. Okay, that specifically has 3 characteristics. I know today there's 14, these consultants come along and they add another V. We started off with 3 Vs, velocity, variety, and volume. Now we've got 14. It's like, really, there's always a consultant in the mix. But the essence, there's 3, those 3. Those 3 characteristics make up what is termed big data: velocity, volume, and variety. Not the 14, those 3. And when I talk about volume, I'm talking about a magnitude of petabytes in the slowest form of time. Gigabytes, terabytes in the slowest form of time. So it's not just about having large amounts of data, it's large amounts of data at real-time velocities or near real-time velocities that is varied, all in one sentence. Okay, that's what is termed big data. Hype, I love the word hype, and I'm going to caution you with hype. These guys, there's some consultancies, they like the hype cycle and what's the new hype. I'm going to give you a quick understanding of hype. The meaning of hype, the word in the English dictionary, means swindle. Means swindle. Its origin came from the 1930s out of Chicago, where players used to hype up something so people would invest money and then they'd run off with their money. That's the meaning of the word hype, and that's the origin. So when you hear hype, just beware. Somebody's hyping something, taking your money, and he'll probably run off and tell you something else. So that's sort of my view. So be careful with hype. Don't believe what you hear. Go and investigate yourself. Often I find people listen to the hype, they develop the hype, and hype is a sales strategy. It is not a technology strategy. It is a sales strategy. People buy product and services and implement them based on hype. And then they figure out, why did I waste all this money? I don't know what to do with the tool. Well, they've fallen for a sales strategy. And it's a very effective one. So I'm just giving you that context. Be very careful. Cloud is a must in big data. And cloud is all about data. It's not about PaaS and IRS and everything you talk about that Microsoft sell you. Yes, those are products. But cloud in its essence is data, not application. You can put applications there like they do, IS, PaaS, and SaaS. That's a technique, it's a deployment model, it's something that's easy. You click a button, it happens, but that's not cloud. Cloud is data, and it's all about data, if you think about it. Without data, there is no cloud. Okay, so 3 contexts. Some things. Data isn't a simple fix for a problem. Big data is not a solution that you can lead your organization with. It is not BI on steroids, and big data isn't a solution. Don't think big data solves problems. It doesn't. In fact, it creates more problems than it solves. Big data does not lend itself to low-hanging fruit. And the reason why I say these topics, this is the justifications a lot of people use for big data. Oh, we're gonna become better at BI. We're gonna kill our low-hanging fruits. Big data also comes with big wallet. And the architectures around big data are fundamentally different to your traditional data architectures. And these technologies are expensive. You're talking about MPP devices like Netezza and Teradata that run thousands of processes. They can process thousands of petabytes in seconds. It talks about Lustre, high-speed file systems, not your AIX and Linux. It talks about streaming, real-time ingestion, not ETL. Even on the data science component, data science, its fundamental models are different. There are two types of AR stats that you get, AR models. You get observable statistics, which are most of your AR models. They use a term called observable statistics. And there's a second one called implied statistics. Now, observable statistics wants data in a nice, pretty picture, nicely packaged. This is what your data scientists use. Oh, your data's dirty, it must be clean, must be all nicely structured and ordered in a database. Because why? Their models are based on observable statistics. So they need clean data that's representative, that is complete, so they can train a model. That's observable. Big data does not use observable AI. It uses implied statistics. Implied statistics means these models and this stats, the mathematics behind it, are fundamentally different because it can use on a data set that's different, doesn't have to be ordered and structured. It can be incomplete, doesn't have to be complete. These are fundamentally different models, fundamentally different mathematics. And when you talk about learning models, deep learning and all that, you're talking about implied statistics, not observable. Observable models that typically a data scientist create, they build a model, they train it. Once the model is built, they deploy it. The model doesn't learn from that point. It's static. Every now and again, they'll do what they term correct model drift. And they'll go in, they'll take the model out, and they'll correct it because the model is drifting. That is not a learning model. So please, the other notion around that, be very careful when you talk data science and AI because it's different. Okay, a lot of people in banks say they've got AI. No, they don't. They've got models that they develop through a learning process that they deploy that runs in a static fashion. I call that advanced automation. Not intelligent. It's not intelligent. Don't be fooled by it. It's important to understand these nuances because these things fundamentally impact big data. And when somebody shows me an architect and talks big data, and they talk ETL, and they talk structured modeling, or they talk observable AI models, it's not big data. They don't know what it is. So don't be fooled by the hype, guys. Very important to know what you're talking about and understand, don't get sold down a road that you don't want to go down because you'll lose and waste money. Okay. Right, so let's talk about some positive news, backdrop. Some of you might or might know, everybody's aware of GitHub. Now I'm going to talk to you what makes Africa unique. GitHub. Last year, 65 to 70% of all deployments to GitHub was originated from Africa. More specifically, Kenya, I think South Africa was third on the list. Why is this important? It's important because Africans are resilient. Africans are adaptive. We all know the African challenges around education, higher education, lack of universities, lack of schooling, etc., etc., etc. And most Africans do not have access to this. So what does that do? Well, it drives our youngsters, our students, to go and solve the problem of knowledge gaining in a different way. What they do is they self-learn. They don't go to university. Most of them don't. But they're hungry for knowledge. So what do? Coming into this fourth age, you've all seen digital learning processes accelerate on various social platforms. That's free. So what are African students doing? They are educating themselves. They are forming their own communities. They are learning technologies by themselves, not through universities, not through any formal constructs. And they're using collaborative tools. They're one of the highest users, by the way, of collaborative tools in the world, are Africans. Believe it or not. Not only are they learning, it's teaching them a fundamental skill that is ultimately required in this new age. That is self-learning and adaptation and resilience. Because if you cannot self-learn, if you cannot be resilient, and you cannot adapt in real time in this digital world, you will find yourself probably out of a job. Because this digital world and technologies are moving so fast. You don't have time to go to your university and study and get a degree over 3 years. You don't have time for that. By the time you finish your degree, you're obsolete. It's great for a foundation, but education, the real learning, happens through yourself, in your own time. Self-learning, self-management. Drive, it teaches you drive, it teaches you focus. And that is a very, very good skill to have. These youngsters that are published, by the way, this is code. This is software code, and they're young. This is in the 25-year-old age group. Imagine in 10 years, all those 25-year-olds now becoming, that are qualified programmers. Where do you think Africa is going to be sitting when it comes to the programming capital of the world? They are teaching themselves to program. They're teaching themselves to collaborate. They're teaching themselves the new technologies. America does not have that level of skills transfer and throughput in its educational systems. In 10 years, the world is going to find out that we will have the biggest population of technologists on the planet with the skills that are required. Self-learning, resilience, adaptability, lateral thinking, thinking about new ways to solve problems. And Africa is full of those examples. 60% of the population under the age of 25 are making the world's largest contribution to content digitally. 10% increase in YouTube. In Africa, why? They're using it as a learning platform. They are building the skills and the knowledge and the drive to compete in this new world. That is something the rest of the world doesn't have, because they're lazy. Go to university, get 5 degrees, sit on their ass, let the government pay for them. That doesn't make you a technological leader, okay? On top of that, Africa, or Africans, are very trustworthy when it comes to digital and machine technologies. We are ranked, South Africa is ranked 37 in the world, 7th in the world as the most trusting nation when it comes to AR and the output of AR models and technology. That's good and bad. Let me tell you the good about the good. That means you can deploy this type of technology in our society very quickly, and it'll be adapted and accepted very quickly, which is great. By the way, America, China, USA, Britain are around about 37. They are like way down the scale. About 2% of Americans believe what a machine tells them. 2% of Americans believe a machine. What happens when you try to deploy digital technologies in a society that doesn't believe in it? It doesn't go very far. It's very difficult. So it allows us that capability of accepting and inculcating it as part of our civilization or our culture very quickly. It's easier for us to do than, say, America, Germany, Britain, etc., because of the way we as a society trust machines. The bad side is you need to filter the nonsense, or you need to filter the signal from the noise. Coming back to my Zuma encounter, Because you're very trusting, you're also very, very exposed. So that's the downside, and you need to be cognizant of that. The near future. 2022, only 20% analytics insights will deliver business outcomes. People, this is against the top 500 Forbes companies. Value of insights, only 20%. Trust, 75. Data literacy, 80. AR ethics, 60. Those are the problems people face in organizations. By 2023, next year, 75% large organizations will hire AI behavioral people. These are people that understand the behaviors and specialize in the behavior of AI. Because that's where we're coming to. Ethics is a big problem. Ethics is a big problem. How we use AI, big problem. Literacy has become explicit and necessary to drive business cases. So everybody in this room, as an example, better understand AI, better understand big data, its weaknesses, its shortcomings, because if you do not understand these fundamentals, you're going to find yourself exposed. Because the youngsters I've just referred to that are under 25 are far more adaptable than you are. They are far more literate than you are. And they're developing 60% of the world's digital platforms, or involved in the world's digital platforms, are Africans. So us old guys, like myself, our days are numbered. So if you're not learning, if you are not learning every day, you're going to become obsolete. Because those youngsters are hungrier than you. They all want a job because of the unemployment rates. They have hunger, they have knowledge, they have foresight, they can think laterally, they can solve problems, and they can look after themselves. So best everybody starts to learn. I read a hell of a lot every day. I listen, I use podcasts every day. I need to make sure that I maintain my levels of knowledge and understanding in this domain. Do the same. That's the near future. And it's very near, by the way. Understanding. What is it? The two big challenges. Big data brings paradoxes. Understand that. Everybody in this fourth age wants standardization and personalization. Is driving a lot of our interaction in this new world. How do you as an individual interact with a bank, interact with each other? They want personalized service, etc., etc., etc. It's driving a lot of that. It is also driving the debate behind centralizing your data or decentralizing your data. Big data can only work in a centralized fashion. If you have a decentralized construct, it will not work. So that's a paradox it brings. We have an organizational strategy driving towards democratization, and we have big data that says must be centralized or it won't work. These are the paradoxes that come along with this question. Important to understand those. African needs, we need privacy, storage, compute, integrated knowledge and skills, to name a few. I won't go into all of them, but these are the big things we need to focus as Africans on. And I believe we can, because we're resilient. Africans are resilient. Real world examples. Let's talk about real world. Big data lends itself to certain industries. Not all industries are equal in big data. Okay. Some industries are better at it than others due to their function as an industry. Some are worse at it because of the complexity and regulation of the industry. This chart shows you, banking as an example, is not a very good use case for big data. Why? It's complex, it's highly regulated, it's structured, and we have far more guardrails and compliance issues and needs and laws than anybody else. See, big data lends itself to a little bit of freedom. Banks don't necessarily have that. Complexity of a bank is very, very high. Banks are complex ecosystems, far more complex than, let's say, the bottom of the scale, which is wholesale, which sells food and clothes, You can't compare the ecospheres between a wholesaler industry and a big data industry. You can't compare the two. So certain industries lends itself better towards big data than others. Banking, although we all like to talk about big data in banking, it's not very easy to do in a bank. It's very expensive, very complex, highly regulated. Takes a long time to do that in a bank. Wholesaler, utilities, transportation, very easy. Less regulated, less complex, and typically very flat infrastructure and technologies. Doesn't have a very complex legacy. Banks have very complex legacies. So we must also remember that. And if I look at some benefits, let's have a look at some benefits. Sears halved the defection rate of customers over 12 months. So they cut their people that left their business by 50% in 12 months. T-Mobile saved 34 million gallons of fuel per year. T-Mobile, who's a transport company, 34 million liters or gallons of fuel per year. That's what big data did for them. US Express increased competing purchase actions by 15%. They grew their business by 15%. Walmart, 200 million savings over 3 years. Norfolk Southern, 90% improvement in productivity, 10% incremental value. 𝐂𝐨𝐧𝐼 reduced the risk of blood clots, medical company, by 77% in their patients by using big data. So they are when big data is good, big data is really good. Big data can bring big benefits, but you need to understand it. South Africa, coming into the elections. How does South Africa use big data? Well, here's a big data landscape of the political demographics the South African government uses. So they track political ideology. Because they know you all vote. So they know who you are and who you voted for. They know that. So what they use big data for is they see how you move around the country when you move. And they can understand the concentration of political concentration. That's how South Africa uses it. That's an example. Okay, and your affiliations. They also track who you know, like banks. By the way, banks track who you know and where you send money to. Big map of you. So, yeah, we know. We've got all of it. Some other examples. Flights across Africa, map of the internet, the most holiday pictures taken. All big data. But I believe Africans have a chance in this age because of the people we are, how we're doing it, and we're not reliant on manufacturing, which was a key pivotal point of the third industrial age. If you had high manufacturing standards in the third age, you were a world leader. And you could not compete unless you had efficient and effective manufacturing pipelines. The fourth age doesn't rely on that. So it gives Africa a chance. We don't need manufacturing to make us a global leader anymore, because we can use data. So we need to look at the opportunities that data brings for Africa, and more importantly, South Africa. If we do it correctly, we don't have those limitations that we had in the third age. Because it's fluid, it's digital. And we're starting to see the behaviors in people and the youngsters change over time. And they are going to make an impact. Mark Shuttleworth, Elon Musk, all Africans. The electron microscope was developed in South Africa, believe it or not. The electron microscope, South African invention. We have the potential. And when we have the potential and we combine it with our understanding of how we can use data, you can be a world leader. That is me. I'm Paul. I hope you found it entertaining. I hope you found it educational. I hope you heed my warnings. And I hope you take up my advice about continual learning. Because if you don't, these youngsters are going to kick your butts. And they will. That's me. If you need me, I'm on LinkedIn. Happy to chat, happy to give advice. I coach, I mentor in the space. You want help? I'm open. Ping me. I help everybody.